affected communities develop appropriate advocacy messages and campaigns, access justice, and obtain redress. She has dedicated most of her career life to working with and assisting civil society actors, survivors of sexual violence crimes, and communities affected by serious crimes and human rights violations in identifying appropriate options for advancing context-specific options for justice, accountability, and legal reform. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Stella as she takes us on with the rest of the program.
Okay, good morning. First, thank you for keeping time so that we are able to start on time. I understand the profiles of the speakers and the authors were shared with you, and the bulletin has been shared with you. So we will run this meeting until 12:30, and we will begin in the format of having questions posed to the authors. Perhaps let me say that we have 4 of them on this side of the room. There's one who's missing. I think it's important to just say he was not able to travel, Hassan. So when you open the bulletin, he's the first author, and he had written on the Xeer system in Somalia. We had really hoped that he would be here so that we have, because all the research papers actually build up on each other and relate. So I would urge you to later on have a look at the bulletin, not now. And read Hassan's article as you read the others, and hopefully you will see how they relate. So, and then we will not read through the profiles, which you already have. They were sent to you. We will start our session. The Horn of Africa Bulletin, this one that is being launched today, has focused on transitional justice, approaches that have been used in the past, and those that are currently in use in 3 countries within the Horn of Africa, and specifically Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia. So from all the 5 articles that are in the bulletin this time round, they actually focus on transitional justice approaches in these particular countries. And what we hope to get from this session is just an understanding of the combinations that have been used, their effectiveness, and the different approaches, what has been useful for the different countries, and what lessons can actually be learned by countries that are actually still implementing transitional justice approaches. So we will start with Wario, who is on my immediate left. Wario, your articles sets out how the Moyale peace committees, which are rooted in cross-border communities, have actually achieved significant milestones in addressing complex cross-border disputes and fostering peace among these communities. That has not necessarily been the case with other mechanisms that are rooted within communities. So why do you think the informal Moyale peace committees have actually been successful where others have not? And including why they are more successful than sometimes the formal governance structures?
Yes. Thank you so much, team, and good morning, good people. Am I audible, please? It seems there's a silence in the room. I have to confirm. So, as she's trying to put it, my name is Mohamed Wario. Mohamed Wario is a Kenyan by birth and Ethiopian by origin, born and brought up in Moyale. School also in Moyale for those early days, and maybe come to Nairobi only for the first time when I'm coming to the university. And the rest is history. So, you can also interact with the document and you can see. So, I think the area of interest is cross-border peace committees, and cross-border peace committees, I call them unsung heroes of our land. Is that geographically, Moyale is located, I think, around 800 kilometers from where we are sitting in Nairobi. And also equally from Addis, if slightly more than 800 kilometers from Addis. So it's geographically disadvantaged by being from the core. So we are in the periphery of this part. I think that's one. Number two is that even from the history point of view, I don't want to go much into that, is that the people who are around this place are people who are literally at the far end of this, and they are the pastoralist communities. And the discussion going around being Kenyan is that there's 1 man, 1 vote, 1 shilling. And these are the people who are talking about 1 man, 1 kilometer, and 1 shilling. Those are the things. So the reason as to why I think cross-border peace committees of Moyale are successful and stand tall, and sometimes also maybe beats governments hands down, is that even in the composition of that particular cross-border peace committees, is that they are local and understanding, and they have trust. Unlike maybe political positions where somebody you vie for, you have to go and campaign. For you to become a member of these particular committees, it's just by you standing tall, and among them your peers, among your elders, and then you are morally accepted in the society. And this gives them, this committee, or being a member of such a person, or be somebody of moral regard, and being a member of this particular committee, whenever that they go as a team, and they remember we have 14 sub-tribes living in Moyale. Those are the major ones, but we still have also Kenyans, they call it maybe corner communities, the entire group. So by being somebody, by these committee members, understanding local understanding and trust, having the trust, local communities in Moyale, trust them much than the government bodies. So I think that's one. Number two is flexibility in approaches. Unlike government, which has got bureaucracy, you know, for government it's not like a flip of the hand. There's an issue, the government respond. That area is disadvantaged in the sense that geographically, you don't know which government should come in first. In the sense that could be Moyale town is a twin town. On the Kenyan side, it's also Moyale town. On the Ethiopian side, it's also Moyale town. There are some areas which is deemed as a borderland, but government cannot come. Fear of bureaucracies, fear of overstepping into other people's jurisdiction. But these committees, because of their composition, there are 30 people, there are 15 from the Ethiopian side, 15 from Kenyan side, with a few representation of women and youth. They can easily come in. They are flexible in their approaches. I think that's one thing that makes them also successful. Number two is community ownership. Unlike an external factor or the maybe judicial system or the government system, the stakeholders, these are community-owned system. It's like these are community-owned, community-driven, a true bottom-up. Not the bottom-up for the government of the day, but a true bottom-up of the discussion. So being a community, it's a community-led initiative. So their remarks or their action points are listened to from all walks of life on the borderland communities. Another thing I think that also makes them successful is cultural sensitivity. Remember, this is a pastoralist community where culture is a key factor, in the sense that if you see how the approach that they use in their reconciliation, in their negotiation, they are sensitive to culture. There's instances will also make them to be quite unique and more effective to the borderland communities. And their mediation and reconciliation skills. Being a member of that particular committee, you are not necessarily need to have papers, educational papers, or anything. But remember, over the years, your skill has been honed. You listen to your forefathers, your forefathers listen to the other generation. So by virtue of now you being the system and you standing tall from the sub-clan that proposed you to be a member of this committee, your skill has completely been honed. So these are the team of experts in their own way. So this team of 30 people, they have good knowledge on how to mediate, on how to, so that whatever they're going to really have the buy-in from all the communities, the borderland communities. I think that's also one. Number two is also sustainability and continuity. How? Like these committee members, there's no incentive. They are not salaried. They are not being paid anything to be a member of that particular committee. And it's not like a program which is time-bound. They are there. They are part and parcel of the community. So they are literally, continuity is not in question. Maybe project come and capacity build them, go, but they are there. They are the first responders of the community. That's how they bridge gap. I think those are some of the things, some of the reasons I think that these committees are more successful than the other government body in comparison to the government bodies.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. It's on now. Thank you so much, Wario. We will cross over to Ethiopia and have Yabsra take us through a snippet around the conversation that began in 2018 in Ethiopia, when the current government initiated a process, a transitional justice conversation within the country. That conversation has led to the establishment of several transitional justice processes that are currently being implemented. So, Yabsra, could you just take us through what the current transitional justice mechanisms that are operational in Ethiopia are doing, and the motivation for adopting these particular processes? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stella. As you may, is it working? Okay. So, as most of you might be familiar with the current political and security context of Ethiopia, especially for the past 5 and 6 years, after the reform, there were also conflicts happening in different parts of the country. And also, not only the conflicts that have happened in the past 5 years, the violation of human rights and grievances from the community in the past regimes have caused several problems in the country. So that during the reform there were different actors and experts calls for implementation of transitional justice in the country. So there were different platforms, organized experts, academicians were asking the government to come up with such kind of initiative. So the northern conflict broke out, as we all know, and there was, especially in terms of the motivation, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and UNOHCHR, the Higher Commission for Human Rights, has conducted an investigation on the allegation and violation of the violations happened during the conflict, so that based on their findings they come up with a recommendation that compelled the government to implement a comprehensive national transitional justice policy. Or to initiate the process. That's one of the biggest motivation in the country. Accordingly, the government established an interministerial task force from Ministry of Peace, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Justice, and Ministry of Social Affairs to implement the recommendations from the investigation. And also there was another commission established as a part of investigation, as well as to support the government in the implementation of the transitional justice process and the recommendations brought by the joint investigation of the Human Rights Commission and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and UNOHCHR. So that they were in the middle of that process. The Ethiopian federal government and the Tigray Liberation Front has reached an agreement and signed the Pretoria Peace Deal, which is a cessation of hostilities agreement in South Africa, Pretoria. So on the Article 10 of the agreement emphasizes the necessity of implementing a comprehensive and full-fledged transitional justice in the country in line with the African Union Transitional Justice Policy and also the country's constitution. So accordingly, the Justice Advisory Board of the government, which is Ministry of Justice, established a technical working group of experts to draft a policy options, which is a green paper, I think released last year in January. And that working group conducted different consultation, more than 80 consultations in different parts of the country on the policy options to collect feedback from the public and compile the findings and submitted to the government, which is approved by Council of Ministers on April 2024, last month. So that was the process so far regarding the TJ, but in the middle there was also another big initiative which is commenced by the government, which is Ethiopian National Dialogue process. So it was established on December 2021 by House of People representatives. So currently it's at the stage of collecting an agenda from different committee groups. And this week they have already conducted the agenda collection process in Addis by discussing with different committee sections, including CSOs, some political parties, with the educational sector, with different sectors of the community. So this is the process, and there are the motivations. Like overall, the government has acknowledged the violation of human rights, the grievances, and all those issues happen in the country. So that's why the government is genuinely acted those processes, by taking also the recommendation of different actors into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps just to follow up, in your research, there are some concerns that you brought out that have arisen from how the management of these processes has unfolded. Could you just touch on some of the concerns?
Okay, thank you. So, while going through those processes, there were different concerns, especially coming from the public, the elites, and also external actors. The first concern was about its inclusivity, especially the TJ, regarding to the transitional justice policy development. There was a technical working group of experts, which is comprised only professionals or academicians who are excelled in TJ and have similar background. So most of the concerns raised in this process was inclusivity of political parties, disabilities, CSOs, and other actors. So that was one of the issue, and the clarity and transparency of the selection of this, the working group members, as well as the National Dialogue Commissioner selection. In fact, regarding the National Dialogue Commission, the recommendation or the nomination was publicly made. Like the public was able to directly engage in nominating commissioners, but the selection criteria or the process of screening the finalists, which is currently serving as a commissioners, was not publicly announced. So there were some unclarities, and that is also another concern. The other issue is the timing regarding specifically to this TJ, Transitional Justice Policy inception. Most of them said that 2018 would have been the right time to initiate the process, because after that there were so many things happened in the country that affected the social cohesion, the political environment, and also, which has directly impacting the economy and other institutions of the society. So the timing also another concern is by the committee interest, as I mentioned, regarding to the unclarities in selection of appointees, and also the ground implementation, like selection of the representatives for the national dialogue, selection of participants for those processes. So there are the concerns which have been raised by the public and also different actors. Thank you.
Thank you, Absa. Eden, sticking to Ethiopia, you also conducted your research focused on Ethiopia and the transitional justice process. And your research specifically outlines how the use of traditional mechanisms is being considered as an important component of the ongoing transitional justice processes in Ethiopia. Why, from your research and the interviews that you conducted, was this considered important? And which mechanism and traditional processes would this be anchored on by the ongoing transitional justice mechanisms?
Thank you, Stella, and good morning to everyone. Yes, so my research basically delves into the inclusion of traditional justice mechanisms into the national dialogue process. The current peace building initiative in Ethiopia, what we consider the dual, the national dialogue process and also the TJ processes, brought the traditional justice mechanism into focus. So in Ethiopia, we have the traditional justice mechanisms are very much anchored within the local communities and community values, and they're very much accessible, flexible, and focused on consensus building. And in the past, a lot of researchers, including also the last year's study, shows that 80% of the population do regard these mechanisms are very much relevant, and also yearly they educate, solve conflicts, like 3 million cases yearly. So basically the inclusion is very important one. This traditional justice mechanisms pretty much understand the concerns and the needs of the community. They'll be able to provide truth-finding processes, aid, and also the reconciliation process, the social mending, and also the forgiveness aspect of the process. This is important because in Ethiopia, there's a lot of division and there's a lot of polarization currently that is going on. And bringing community-focused discussions into the ongoing national dialogue process perhaps would bring on board those the shared values and the shared customs within amongst the society. So the other part would be traditional justice mechanisms have more legitimacy compared to the formal mechanisms, and it would be very easy for them to also facilitate and ease the discussions. We anticipate in the discussions there will be some stalemates and deadlocks within those discussions, and what better way to call upon traditional leaders to facilitate those discussions, to offer guidance, to offer wisdom, and to also be able to offer their expertise in terms of conflict resolution mechanisms. That is part and parcel of the custom. The other part will be also traditional justice mechanisms do bring on board the voice of the grassroots communities to the forefront. Usually, if we include them, there's a high chance, there's a potential when we do the recommendation of the Ethiopian National Dialogue, it will be culturally relevant, and also there will be a chance to have community ownership within those processes. So it's very key to have those elements within the National Dialogue, which is a very top up processes, and bringing those elements will potentially bring the bottom-up process to the forefront. So this is some of the issues. So in terms of anchoring, this is one of the debates within I would say the existing incorporating traditional justice mechanisms into the national dialogue process, because Ethiopia is a nation with 80 plus ethnic groups. So each region, each community have their own traditional justice mechanism. So the question would be which one and whose customs are we going to adopt at the national level? So this is one of the biggest question that we have. But then again, so we kind of have to see traditional justice from a macro point of view, where we say, let's look at the shared values. Let's look at, what they bring. When you look at the concept of Ubuntu, it's about shared humanity. It's about reconciliation. So these mechanisms, technically, they might differ in terms of procedure, in terms of ritual, but at the end of the day, the philosophy behind those traditional mechanisms are the same. It's all about finding the truth. It's all about mending the broken relationship. It's all about forgiving each other, and also about talking to each other at the end of the day. So some also do argue that finding this denominator will not be a daunting task, as long as we anchor it on the idea of shared humanity, what we consider as Ubuntu.
Thank you. Thank you, Eden. So building up from there, we will move to Rose. Rose, your research focused on the Kenyan context. We just want to hear, we've heard from Ethiopia that they are adopting different approaches to their transitional justice process. Kenya was there a couple of years ago, implementing a comprehensive transitional justice process. Could you just perhaps just take us through the approaches that were adopted by Kenya at the time, and why these approaches were important for the affected communities to have a broad range of different transitional justice approaches?
Okay, thank you again for this opportunity. My name is Rosa Lulu. As she has mentioned, I come from Kenya, and I work with the Life and Peace Institute. So I looked at a combination of different approaches in terms of the national level, international level, and at the national level we looked at community engagement. And the reason why our TGRC took these different approaches and how it has been helpful to us, when we look at the international level, we used the approach of the International Criminal Court. And the International Criminal Court played a major role in terms of addressing crimes that might not be adequately addressed at the national level. And the best thing is that when we were doing the research in the community, people would actually attribute to the International Criminal Court, and they mentioned that, yes, since we had the trials at the ICC, it's true that we can say there is that fear of people being taken back to the ICC. So it's helping some of our political leaders to withdraw from engaging in human rights violation in the level that they feel the international courts may apprehend them. So it provides that impartiality. It also prevents political interference. And we also looked at the national level, whereby we had the different CSOs engaging in transitional justice. And the key one I'll talk about is we have the TGRC process. The TGRC process played a key role when it comes to documenting human rights violations and injustices that happened since we got independent until February 2008. That was at the aftermath of the post-election violence in Kenya. And we didn't have a number of these injustices documented. It's not only the process of documentation, but also the approach that they took in terms of collaboration with the local communities and also the international communities in ensuring that the process runs smoothly. At the community level, there are transitional justice mechanisms that are being used. And I can link this to what my colleague Wario has said. The traditional reconciliation approaches are key in addressing the deep-rooted conflict reconciliation ways, and they look at how does it address the social fabric of the community? How are they embedded together? Because we have these different approaches that are new to the community, but the community already have, especially the traditional community, they already have conflict resolution approaches that they are using. And I will say the important aspect of the synergy between, the important aspect about the synergy between these three levels of combination is not only that it helps to give a comprehensive framework to addressing all levels of transitional justice, it's key in terms of addressing the gaps and the shortcomings that one of the approach might have. And it's also important when it comes to resource mobilization for the international community and the national level. When it comes to implementation of transitional justice, resources are key, especially when we are talking about compensation mechanisms. It also helps in preventing recurrent conflict because it helps in keeping the checks and balances from the local level through the international and the national levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. Just going through the articles, there was one particular common thread in all the articles, including Hassan's, and that particular thread was on the importance of these transitional justice initiatives being rooted within communities, being community-centered, but also being victim-centered. And so for the next round, could you, all of you, just perhaps highlight why it's an important factor? And I know some of you have touched on a bit on that, why this is an important factor on how transitional justice processes are designed and implemented, and how the lack of investing in this has actually affected ongoing transitional justice processes. I know, Eden, you had covered a bit of that in your article, and Sra, what you're actually seeing. with the lack of community engagement and awareness building with communities. I remember, perhaps before I pose the question to you, when we were going through the Kenya Transitional Justice process in between 2009 and 10, when these initiatives were introduced, that we would be having a commission of inquiry on what had actually led us to have the post-election violence, and we would be having a transitional justice and reconciliation commission that would be collecting evidence around the historical injustices and human rights violations that had happened, as Rose put it, since independence. One of the things as civil society, when we were going around the country trying to sensitize communities that these mechanisms would be approaching them, they would be coming, one of the questions we were being asked was what would be different, because we had many commissions, and a lot of the reports had remained unimplemented, actually just shelved. And I think what is important that also comes from Rose's and Wario's articles is beyond that process that was seen as a national process, community mechanisms have actually continued. So the sustainability also in what Eden covers in Ethiopia, that the use of traditional mechanisms has actually not been there so far in the process that they are going through, and now there's a conversation of including that, because when we look at the Kenya's transitional justice process, the ICC cases collapse, that's the international that Rose was talking about. The truth and reconciliation process eventually resulted in a report, which was a very protracted process, but it resulted in a report that has not been implemented. A lot of victim groups and survivor groups are still pushing for the implementation of that particular report. So, Rose, as you have really delved in your paper on community perceptions around how the transitional justice process tapped into communities in Kenya, and especially vulnerable communities that would often not be considered. Could you just then take us through a bit on lessons that can be learned about being deliberate while designing transitional justice processes and implementing them in involving communities and ensuring the processes are community-centered and victim-centered? And then Hassan, Wario, okay. Yabsra and Eden, could you also just touch on what has emerged as important factors for ensuring community-centeredness and victim-centeredness in your research papers? We'll start with Rose.
Okay, thanks again for the opportunity. When we talk about inclusion of marginalized communities, I think it's important to note that it's not only inclusion you're talking about during implementation, but inclusion of marginalized community, as my colleague Yafsara said, it's a concern in Ethiopia. It needs to be inclusion since the planning process, the implementation, and also the evaluation process. Because this aspect of inclusion has a strong effect in the process of transitional justice. It strongly contributes to ownership of the process. How have we been involved since the beginning of the process? Do we have ownership of this process, or is it just being brought to us for implementation or during implementation? Do we understand the roadmap that this process is taking? It also promotes the sustainability, as we have mentioned. The local traditional mechanisms promote sustainability in the community. It lives beyond the engagement period. Even when you talk about the TJRC process leaving the community, there are still people who are picking up discussion on some of the violations that are happening within the local level because of these transitional justice approaches that other organizations have brought to them in the community, and they are using it. It is also important when it comes to addressing the root causes of these conflicts and preventing the recurrence of violence and conflict, through meaningful participation. And again, when we talk about inclusion of marginalized community or the underrepresented, it's not just about rubber stamping or ticking boxes. We think of inclusion for meaningful participation. Are their voices being heard? Because most of the time when the women shared, yes, we were included in this transitional justice process, but we don't feel like our considerations are taken. Because it helps to inform the different approaches to transitional justice mechanisms that will address the context-specific issues. Let's not assume that when conflict happens, all of us will be affected the same way. People are affected in different ways depending on the context and the kind of conflict that has happened. So these are some of the key contribution in terms of the lessons that we are getting on the inclusion of marginalized communities. And when I speak to the Kenya transitional justice process, I will say the TJRC did a good job in terms of reaching out to marginalized post-conflict communities, and this informed a gender-sensitive approach because they had a conversation for women only, which they dubbed Conversation with Women. This created a safe space for women to be able to share, and it is important because how safe am I? When we talk about transitional justice, this is a violation of human rights. How safe am I to be able to share and feel comfortable that my opinion will be taken into place? The other lesson that we are getting from the Kenya, aside from that, they also had preparation of children taking statement because we consider children as a marginalized or minority group. They also had preparation with child protection officers that led to the taking of statement. 996 statements were taken from children. So this consideration helps to see how well or how comfortable are we when it comes to engaging with children. And the other thing, as I've mentioned, is the creation of the safe space. And however, this also comes with challenges. Because when we talk about inclusion in transitional justice processes in Kenya, we have youth, which we consider to be 75% of the total population of this country. But in quite a number of the reports, the mention of youth was missing. Out of the approximately 40,000 cases that were had, 2,000 are mentioned to be young people. But when we talk about 2,000, this is not even a quarter of the total number of hearings that were taken. So the voice of the youth, considering that they are victims of this kind of violation, and also most of the time they are the perpetrators when it comes to engagement in violence and conflict, should be considered in terms of giving their voices and especially how they can be included to avoid the recurrence of violence in future. The other challenge was also there is this notion that we are missing the perpetrators when it comes to the aspect of transitional justice in Kenya. So the community doesn't feel that the process was inclusive, one, because it's supposed to be the survivors and the perpetrators together and in the hearings and just being able to ask for forgiveness, because at the end of the day, we are looking at these are the violations that happened. These are the people that committed the violation. It could be, it's because of the creation of safe space for the perpetrators to feel comfortable to also share. That's why they were not brought together with the survivor. Considering that in Rwanda, by 1998, we had approximately 8,000 perpetrators who were killed because of the confessions that they did in public. So these are also factors that and lessons that need to be put into consideration while we are talking about inclusion process in the communities.
Okay, thank you, Rose. Maria?
Yes, and the challenge is that now when somebody speaks before you, they literally add everything and you have nothing to say. But I want to look at the 5 components of TJ. If you look at transitional justice, is that it's not necessarily even about reparation, compensation, but have we, even locally, leave alone at the global level, but we have these local communities from the pastoralist communities who normally fight. But this has been generational war, literally tribal clashes, generational tribal clashes. But at no point has somebody ever, maybe my like third or maybe 50 years ago, my community that I come from will fight with our neighboring communities. But who has ever sit down with them, just not even in terms of compensation, but just now that I'll ask for forgiveness. Who has ever done that, maybe through process of through seeking, who is wrong where and when and why. So because of this, I think the 5 components, if we really look at the aspect of the 5 components of the transitional justice policy, the truth seeking in itself, and we dealt with this thing, we could have saved a lot. Because perennial conflict, why do pastoralists keep on fighting? That's the question. We always talk about pasture, water, and that, and maybe territorial expansion. But there are more to this than this. You are in narration, maybe in the songs women composed, that your father has been killed by that. Your grandfather has been killed by that community. So this seed of discord is going to now fall in the ears of the young generation. So at no point, no one has ever addressed this. And then you see your brother. In this part of this world, you'll be surprised that you will see by maybe somebody coming from communities, you will see him as an enemy without any other thing that he has done to you because of the thing that has been fed into your mind. Those are some of the things that we have. But a classical example, maybe borrowing from what my friend Rosa said, look at what happened in Rwanda. Close to 1 million people died, in the sense that because of what Hutus and Tutsis did. But today, Rwanda, I think, is one of the most peaceful nations. People have decided to follow this thing to the latter. They have decided to forgive each other. I'm also sad to notice to hear that maybe 1,000 people who have come out and confessed, close to 1,000 people have been killed. But that said, have we ever explored this route in our context? That's something that we need to also ask ourselves. It's not about the reparation. Like I cannot ask for you one something that has passed 1,000 years ago. But just a classical example, something that happened 10 years ago. But I can ask you for forgiveness of what my forefathers have done to your community. So those are some of the things that we need to explore. Also, I think, I don't know whether I'm delving far from the question. I can also be madam, so that I can be monitored.
One more minute.
But I think that what we are lacking in the whole setup of this, for it to be more community-centric, is that one of the aspects of the TG is the 5th one is the institutional reform. And when we are doing institutional reform, we are targeting the formal institution only. We are now forgetting the real people, the soldiers who are now dealing with this thing hands-on on day-to-day. Like the classical example of Moele, for example, cross-border peace committees. We are talking about the formal justice system, the court system, the stakeholder, the security infrastructures. Yet, the people who are bearing the brunt are the first respondent. We are now, it's like we are diagnosing the wrong person who is not patient, but we are now leaving the patient. I think that's where we are lacking, and we should now reinvent the wheel. Let it be community-driven. Let this thing be community-owned. Let it be a true bottom-up. It should not be a top-down, where now somebody sits somewhere, come to this crafty document, read to the community. Let it, even in their own local way, let it be a gachacha, that grass that Rwanda people talk about. Go out, talk to these people, bring these two communities together. Not necessarily. Now, I'm also happy, even though we come from a pastoralist community which is very much patriarchal, the space is open nowadays. Women are taking steps. If you look at a cross-border peace committee, it's unheard of for women to be a member of committee before. But today we have 8 members. Out of, I think, 30, we have 8 women. We have 1 youth representative. It's not enough, but it is a step. For me, it's a step in the right direction. Because it never used to be like that. We were never given space on the table. But now, today, we have one of us, but that one can show what is where we are aching. But if you look at even at the global stage, it's not that we are, even globally, the 63% of the world parliamentarians are old people, 63%. And remember, world is youthful than maybe octogenarians. So that's one of the things that we are now battling with. But let's now try to readdress this thing, to make it as simple as possible, as community-driven as possible, so that it can be a true bottom-up.
Thank you. Yepsra?
So when you talk about an inclusivity, for me, it should start from understanding the context. You know, the context in Nairobi, in Kenya, and the context in Ethiopia has many kinds of differences. For example, as Ada mentioned, we have 80+ ethnic groups in Ethiopia. So they are not living in specific location. One ethnic group can live in different parts of the country. So, for example, ethnic X in Tamiria might be a victim of structural violence or physical violence as well. But in some area, the same ethnic group can be perpetrator. So there should be a clear understanding and analysis of the context: who is a victim and who is a perpetrator, but in different location, in different contexts. Accordingly, we will identify whom should we bring on board when we talk about inclusivity in this transitional justice or dialogue, any kind of processes. So that's the first thing I will always recommend to talk about inclusivity, because some community member might be marginalized in some location but privileged in the other area of the country. So that's the first thing. In addition to that, everyone also, in addition to understanding, everyone has the right to know the process currently carried out by the government in the country. For example, in Ethiopia and transitional, when we talk about transitional justice, there is no sufficient sensitization conducted all over the country, because 75% of the total population living in rural areas, where the technology, even the means of communications are rarely accessible. So in that area, if 70% population of the country has no idea what transitional justice means, how can that process be inclusive? Like, the consultations have conducted in different parts, in different regions, but as you can read on the article, the observers were also mentioning that during the policy options consultation on TJ, the one living in the capital city or more advanced area has the ability to recommend additional options in the policy as compared to those who are living in rural or outskirts areas. So in that way, maybe we can consult with those people, but they don't understand what we are even talking, so that they don't have any option to reflect their opinion, to reflect their perspective, or to contribute to the national level engagement. So enough sensitization is also mandatory. Otherwise, transparency. Transparency is key. Everyone should know how that process reached at that level. Otherwise, there will be, the issue of trust. And if the public has no any trust on the processes, the implementation will be challenged. And also, it can aggravate another round of conflict, because some people might feel that we are not consulted. Some people might feel that the issue is not transparent, so it's manipulated, it's hijacked. Different concerns can be raised. So it's not about, bringing people for consultation in that, in a venue and discussing with them. We have to make sure that they are meaningfully engaged in those processes, and they have understand the pros and cons of the discussions, the output, the results. So that's also one of the key issue. And even in the areas, in the people living in the areas where there is an advanced communication, like for example in the capital, one of the gaps identified while I was interviewing with different actors was there was no clear roadmap or strategic plan or any document that shows the current steps or the current stage of the process undertaken by the national dialogue or the working group actors, which means that there's no means of monitoring or evaluating that process based on some guidelines or something. We should have something to rely on to monitor the process and to expect also the outcome. So having such kind of documentation and publicly announce through different means of communication platform, like it can be social media, it can be radio. In rural areas, radio has much access and audience in the rural community. So all the means of communication should be utilized to make the public aware of the process and understand what's going to be implemented, so that they would be engaged from the get-go until the evaluation, and they will also develop a sense of ownership in the process. So in that way, through applying those techniques, I think that's where we can say proudly that we're inclusive, the process was inclusive. Otherwise, it will also aggravate another round of conflict or chaos.
Okay, thank you. Eden?
Thank you. I think Yapsara laid a very good foundation for my intervention. I pretty much concur with what she mentioned. Perhaps maybe to kind of take a bit of a step back. Both the national dialogue process and also the TJ process are a very political process. So in those political processes, how do we bring victims and the community at the center of this process is a very key question, to be honest. So for me, in terms of, I would zoom in into the national dialogue because that's where my research focus is basically the idea that the Commission by itself, is thinking about utilizing traditional mechanisms into the national dialogue process by itself. Might appear that there is a level of, community engagement and victim-centeredness. But the question for me is much more beyond that, because it's one thing putting that statement in the proclamation. It's another when you are practicing, what's put in the proclamation. Because from what we have seen so far, there have been a participant selection and identification, and in those processes, we've not seen traditional justice mechanism being utilized to identify participants, being also in terms of agenda collection as well. The process has begun. So the question also still remains when and where are they going to use those traditional mechanisms. By using those mechanisms, we always will bring a community at the center of the discussion. Traditional leaders will be part of the process. Religious leaders will be part of the process. Different community members will be also part of the process. So actually, bringing what's on paper into reality is what is still very much a challenge. And I think this also kind of ties back to how this lack of investment particularly is aligned with key stakeholders not being part of the national dialogue process. By key stakeholders, I mean armed groups who should be part and parcel of this process. If they're not part of the process, the dialogue would not be representative of the whole community. We're just engaging part of the community. And how can we talk about a dialogue that is considered national when majority, like a good amount of the population, is not part of the discussion, the deliberation? In parts of the Oromia region, the commissioners were not able to identify participants because of the ongoing conflict. In the Amhara region, the national dialogue commissioners were not being able to identify participants because of the ongoing conflicts. So the term national is in question because we're not inclusive of the people who should be part and parcel of the discussion. So in that case, there will be a challenge in the acceptance and implementation of any recommendations when it's not, any national dialogue process should be legitimate in the way that also brings key stakeholders into the discussion. The other part is also limited representation of women and youth. In the establishment of the National Dialogue Commission, majority of, I would say, like 11 of them were selected based on their merits, their academic backgrounds. By the virtue of us choosing the commissioners based on their academic backgrounds, we are not including women, we're not including youth, we're not including traditional leaders. So we don't have them within the commission. So when the commission is a reflective of the elite people, how can we talk about community engagement when we don't have the voices of the committee within also the commissioner? So these are also some of the processes that is a bit challenging the dialogue commission, other than what Yapsara has mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you. So to just close off this conversation, could you all just highlight at least 3 recommendations that came from your studies, which are included in your articles, on how then we could move forward based on these concerns that you had identified in your articles? And we'll start with you, Eden, this time round.
So the first is what I mentioned, some of the questions that kept on coming as Ethiopia is a nation of 80 plus ethnic groups, which customs and whose customs are we going to use? So this is the question that kept on coming over and over again. And one recommendation is to decentralize the traditional justice mechanisms, because we have different communities with different traditional mechanisms, and by decentralizing those processes, we can make sure that we will use everyone's custom in their own understanding, in their own values, so it will be incorporated. So this conversation can take place. I see this both at the local level and also at the national level. So at the national level, what we can do is we can transport the rituals of forgiveness, the rituals of reconciliation, because in Ethiopia we have different ways of rituals where people reconcile. You can slaughter goat, sheep, and then you can say let bygones be bygones. So at the national level, we can also bring more of the ritualistics, the philosophy of the mechanisms. The other is we have to capacitate traditional mechanisms as well as traditional leaders, because from the majority of the conversation I've had, there's a great sense that traditional leaders are not as how they used to be. They're very much now, there's a political interference, and the values attached to them are much more less than they used to be. The youth don't have that particular respect to the elders, because they see them as being corrupted. They're there for the money, but they're not for the well-being of the communities. So if you bring those people into the national dialogue process, which is already in question, there'll be another second layer of question. So to avoid that, there's a need for them to be impartial and neutral, and there's a need to capacitate them through different trainings, different interventions in terms of how they will be able to serve the needs of the people instead of the needs of the government. The third would be also to balance representations in terms of women and youth. As we all know, traditional justice mechanisms can be very male-dominated. They're usually elder men, that is. So the youth, we don't hear the voice of the youth. We usually barely see the voice of the women incorporated into those discussions. So for this to take place, we have to be able to bring women and youth at the forefront of these discussions. They have to be able to be part of, the agenda setting process. The agenda setting process just began in Addis. It's going to continue in the regional states. And so we need their voices. They need to be represented there. They would also need to be part of the recommendation. What recommendation would come that would benefit the youth and also the women from this process? The last would be in terms of recognizing traditional mechanism. As where they stand right now, there's no formal recognition. They educate civil matter only, but they don't educate any criminal matter, at least on paper. But of course, some of the things are changing in practice, because in some places where there are no formal justice mechanisms, or they're ineffective, they do have that in practice. So we can only talk about the incorporation of traditional justice mechanisms when we know how the relationship will be determined towards the formal justice mechanism. So if we don't know that, and when and how they will be incorporated, will be very difficult. So formalizing those mechanisms to support the national dialogue process is very much key. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria?
Thank you. Yes, I think for me it's a bit unique in the sense that it is touching on the cross-border, but nationally maybe Ruth will going to speak for us. Sorry, Ross will going to speak for us from the Kenyan context. For me, I think my three key recommendations, but you're going to interact with the write-up and you're going to see, is that replicating the same cross-border peace committees on the remaining three corridors. How do I mean? We have in the Kenya and Ethiopia share a lot of porous border, and close to maybe 1,000 kilometers. If you run from all the way from Mandera, where they move to on the other side, and then all will go up to Ileret and Omo Valley. So that is the border between Kenya and Ethiopia. But you can imagine these are the same local communities sitting on the other side of each other, in the sense that they are divided by this imaginary borderline, which is a colonial mark, but they are one and the same. These people speak the same language. They share common culture and common language. But we only have cross-border peace committee on one side of that is one Moyale only. We have Sololo Mio remaining, which is not still untouched. Sololo Forole Dire is a corridor. The Dukana Dillo is a corridor. All those remaining corridors don't have this network. And I think one key recommendation that we highlighted in the paper is that we should need to replicate this so that we're going to ease of communication, ease of intervention, and many other things for this cross-border community. Number two is, I think she also rightly put this capacitation of these cross-border peace committees. How do we mean capacitation? Yes, these are the people who are going to Nini, but they will not, no one is eternal. These elders will going to take maybe age will going to come up with them, or even life will going to. So who will going to take shoes from them? Leadership skills. Are they honing other people to come and take? With westernization, with culture, and now with the Western education, culture is fading away. But tomorrow, who will going to take their shoe, put in their shoe? The young folks are not taking up their space the way they're supposed to. So in Moyale, there's a drug endemic. So they need to be coached. There's a purpose of capacity building and coaching of the young leaders to come and take the space of the older ones. That is also a key factor. I think number three, one of the key recommendations for the cross-border Moyale Peace Committee is that formalization of this thing. It's very hard for me to see, it's called informal cross-border peace committees. When are these are the people who are not really calling the shot when they need us. So from the both side of the government, informally the Kenyan government on the Moyale side and the Ethiopian side have accepted that these are the components that they cannot work without. But how I wish this thing is fully documented through our work in the intervention, that they are literally a body that is being also recognized from both ends, so that whenever they do things, government should not come and address it, or they do this with the lee of the government involvement. I think those are the three critical recommendations that I have, and many more have also been said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So in addition to what Eden has clearly mentioned, and also in addition to what I said, I tried to mention like regarding to this transparency and awareness. I also, for me, transitional justice, the overall process is a sacred process, I think that's the last resort we have in order to maintain a sustainable peace. So we have to keep that secrecy at any cost. Otherwise, the next step will be very challenging, and it's also it will be difficult to bring that disintegrated community back to the normal or the regular routines. So that in addition to what I've tried to mention, the implementation process, especially in our country context, there is a dialogue being conducted, and the policy is also currently approved. So the implementation of the findings and the policy should be implemented independently without the intervention of. It requires the intervention of the government, but it should be free from manipulation of uninterested groups. Otherwise, we will face the challenge that we have been facing again. So the independency and the autonomy of the implementation process is very critical. And in addition to that, as it has been mentioned, it's a political, at some component, it's a political issue that's currently affecting the country's context in Ethiopia. So this politics is highly, majority of the component is revolving around in those the Amhara, Tigray, and Oromia region, and the representatives from that area, which is the committee members are not fully engaged in the two processes due to many reasons. So that inclusivity should be maintained again during the implementation and also the remaining process in the future. So that's very key. And in addition to this, the committee members' engagement, there are also political parties who are still dissenting from the two processes, who are not giving, credibility for the two processes. So, and unfortunately, they are representing the majority of, the population or the citizen living in the country. So, bringing them on board is very critical. Currently, government is calling upon those parties to be part of the processes, but I think that requires a different modality to sit and discuss with the representative of the dissenting actors to bring a lasting peace in the country. So this is a sacred process, and we should pay any cost to ensure the successful implementation of the findings from the dialogue, as well as the implementation of the transitional justice policy.
Thank you. Rose?
Thanks again for the key recommendations. I will say, based on the research that I did, there is limited knowledge when we talk about transitional justice, not only at the community level, but generally, transitional justice is still a new term to most of the communities. And this actually calls for action for different organizations to see on how are we continuing this conversation about transitional justice. Do we have strands within our implementation that talk about transitional justice approaches? Are we making this transitional justice approach part of our conflict transformation aspect that organizations and peace-building organizations are working on? So these will address some of the limited knowledge in terms of awareness creation for both local and international organizations that are implementing transitional justice at different levels, and also increasing the localization of transitional justice. As it is in the next recommendation, is that the perception in the community is that transitional justice is the role of the government, but we are not seeing the face, the communities are not seeing the face of the non-governmental organization when it comes to transitional justice. I will say in Kenya, we are not yet there when we talk about transitional justice. Yes, we have the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission report, but we are still waiting for the implementation. There is that hope that in one way or another, we need to do advocacy on the implementation of Volume 4 of the Transitional Justice Report within the community. In terms of also addressing transitional justice, there is need for inclusive processes, both from the international to local level, and also inclusive approaches. As I mentioned, resource is one of the key things when we are talking about transitional justice implementation, and also looking at how do we enhance the livelihood and change the systemic marginalization that we have in these communities to address some of the root causes. I will say as a country we've made big strides when it comes to inclusion of marginalized communities. We have put in place frameworks and structures that actually address the inclusion of marginalized communities. In terms of access to justice, we have the Legal Aid Act of 2016 that looks at how can marginalized communities be able to access justice. One of the key complaints that we got from the research was that the justice process takes a very long time, and it requires quite a number of finance for people to be able to get justice. So there was that need, and as a country, and our moderator has mentioned, we have very good policies on paper, yeah? But we now need to take them from the paper to implement them in the community and look at how are we changing what we have from paper to the community, and what change can it bring to us as a country. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rose. We have come now to the second phase of our session today, which will be a discussion and exchange of views. And so we now will open up the conversation to you, the audience. Having listened to the presentations by the four authors, if you have any questions, clarifications that you would want to pose to them, the floor is now open. Thank you. Yes?
Thank you. Should I stand? Thank you so much. Is this working?
1, 2.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and I look forward to reading the articles. My name's Tanya Bernstein. I'm from the UN Office of the Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa. I have two short questions. The first on Ethiopia. regarding the national dialogue and the use of the traditional justice mechanisms. Now, during the consultations at the community level, which they've, I think, completed now as much as they could, at the Voreda level, I mean, the people that were there, I understand, were elders, religious group leaders, women, youth, representatives from different communities. I mean, was this not raised during those discussions? Because those are the people that would be involved in these traditional justice mechanisms. So my question is, was it raised? And if so, then not taken into account, brought further, let's say, to the next level, or did these people feel that wasn't a space to raise this? So that's a question on Ethiopia. The second is also Ethiopia, but could be for any of the countries. You all mentioned that these are political processes, which I totally agree with. I mean, ideally they shouldn't be, but realistically they are. So, and the challenges you spoke to too about transparency, inclusivity, and that we all know. How to overcome this? Besides encouraging those responsible for these processes to be, more transparent and inclusive, what recommendations would you have, for example, for my office, for the UN, to improve is a tricky word, but to change these processes to address some of the challenges that you spoke of. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Sure. Three.
Hello, good morning. My name is Ima. I work for the European Union. And also one question about Ethiopia. Well, you described the national dialogue, we have transitional justice process. We also have the Somali Through Commission that is taking place, it was created in the Somali region. We also have the DDR process that is the largest, so they say it is the largest and most complex DDR process in Ethiopia. How much all these processes that at the end they are trying to contribute to peace, to justice, accountability, are interrelated, because it seems that they are working in a very isolated manner, And also when we talk to these actors and these institutions, they also mentioned this, that there is no much, actually Rose, you were talking about synergies, some minutes ago. Which are the synergies, or what could be the synergies, in order to have much more impact and also to ensure coordination? Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you. Good morning. My name is Steve Biko from Forum Civil. I have a question that maybe would resonate with most of the wonderful presenters. On the part of accountability, how do we ensure that we enhance accountability, especially for the leading of the political class? Looking at it from the perspective that this is the same group that hugely contributes to challenges that we experience. So how do we enhance accountability on their part? For example, when you're looking at the issue of TGRC, how do we ensure that the government puts its foot down and ensure that recommendations are implemented without maybe being doctored or watered down? Yeah, maybe it might resonate with Kenya and maybe Ethiopia. And, thank you.
Okay. We'll take two more, and then maybe we can have the answer. Them answer. Yeah, so give her.
Thank you. I'm Beatrice from the Life and Peace Institute. My question is related a bit too, because to what extent have there been conversations around who is undertaking the TJ process? So the commissioners themselves or whoever has been charged. And if for the Kenyans, they recall that there were questions around the chair couldn't go to some areas because he was linked to some of the atrocities that had been done in those particular areas. And so whereas there had been political appointees, these political appointees also represent some of the perpetrators. And so to what extent did the respondents raise this as a concern? Thank you.
So that's Ethiopia.
Good morning. I'm Fiona from the Open Society Foundation. My question is on Eritrea, the role, within the Tigray crisis, and if there's anything your research captured around that in regard to transitional justice and accountability. Thanks.
Yeah, so for now, I think let's come back to the speakers. Quite a number of questions on Ethiopia, so maybe let's start with you, yes. Eden and Yebsra. I think there are 4 questions that cover that, and then perhaps on the political processes and recommendations on how to improve. Maybe we can just have Wario also and Rose input into that. Thank you.
Okay. I think I'll start, and I'm pretty sure Yapsara will also join in. I'm going to start with the second question, where we were talking about there is a process in the Somalia region, there's also the DDR, and the national dialogue, and the TJ aspect, and where is the synergy? That's a very good question. And I'll also bring another part, also the ongoing peace negotiation is also part of this as well. Yes, this is a question that keeps on coming over and over again, because particularly in terms of also the national dialogue process and the TJ process are going simultaneously, but we rarely do see synergies. We rarely do see any interrelation or interactions, and there's also a debate where some scholars and also some political parties also do state then the TJ process should have been the outcome of the national dialogue. So people are not convinced that those two processes should be simultaneously going together. But on the other part, we also see debates where we say, why should we wait for the national dialogue to bring about recommendation? Because the need for TJ is now. The victims are asking questions. They want to know what happened, why it happened, who is responsible, and they want this process to take right now. And also, in terms of for armed parties to also lay down their arms, there's a need to have that TJ process intact. So we don't see that synergy, to be honest. And also the DDR part has become very, very political. Some part of the country has been disarmed and the rest is not disarmed. So this is also an issue that is currently taking front. How can we talk about the TJ and the national dialogue process without also talking about DDR? I was part of the validation process of the TJ policy document. This was one of the questions that was asked, and this was also one of the questions that was not answered. So I don't have the answer to it. I understand that the synergy is very much crucial, and those processes should feed to one another. We can't have talking about the national dialogue while we also don't talk about the TJ processes. Of course, one issue of TJ process is also balancing and sequencing. What should come first? When we talk about TJ, people usually talk about accountability, but they don't talk about the element of dialogue and reconciliation within it. So it's because we see the national dialogue as a softer version of a peace-building process, and TJ as the hardcore version of a peace-building process. But personally, that's not my take on that. But this has been asked. I understand that Transitional Justice Working Group has been asked this question. They've not had like a direct and clear answer to it. So I would just leave it at that. Maybe if Yapsara would come in to also maybe go to the first question that was asked. Yes, religious leaders, community, they're also part of the community. They are part of the process. They have been selected, some of them as representative. But when it comes to how to use those, particular traditional justice mechanisms The question has particularly lingered. During the interview, I've had a conversation with one of the commissioners to ask how the commission, because it's part of the proclamation, it says the commission is going to use traditional knowledge and values to undertake the dialogue process. But like Yapsara mentioned, there's no roadmap. There's no roadmap when they want to include, the traditional mechanisms into the dialogue, because the national dialogue has 3 phases: the preparatory, the process, and the implementation phase. So we've not clearly seen it in the preparatory phase. Perhaps the agenda collection is coming. Would we see it at the regional levels? That's a question I'm also asking. In the process level is also another question we will ask, because like I mentioned earlier, there will be deadlocks, stalemates in the conversation. So will traditional leaders will be called upon, to resolve conflicts? Also in the implementation phase, would the national dialogue put traditional justice mechanisms as part of its recommendation? We don't know. So what I've learned from, the interview is they're going with the flow in a way that they will determine things as they go along. So there's no setting stone in terms of how they will use this, but as the agenda item, because we don't know what the agenda item is going to be. It's going to be focusing on the national issues, we know, but particularly which issues is going to be, we don't know. That's in progress. So the conversation is they're yet to figure out when they will incorporate traditional justice mechanisms in this process. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So most of the things are mentioned by Eden, specifically the first question. It's just there were consultations being conducted, but most of the findings are still, may not come up with such kind of recommendation, or some of them are not still, publicized to the public. So we cannot confidently say that those things are recommended or mentioned. So regarding the second question, how to overcome the transparency and related issues, beside encouraging the government to be transparent, and for me, there are different actors beyond the government. Most of the time we say that the transitional justice is a political process, I think because we expect the politicians or the government to initiate this process rather than any actor operating in the country. So that's why we usually say it's a political process, but there are also, for example, media, civil society organizations has a key role in even challenging the government to be transparent enough, and to investigate more what's really happening, or what's the objective behind, and any other factors. So we are still pushing the CSOs, the media actors, and other stakeholders to jointly work and push for transparency and accountability throughout those processes. But at the end of the day, it's a political decision and a political will to be transparent or not. So, but if those actors are strongly, challenging the process, question the process, such kind of flexibility, or there will be a room to be a bit transparent, or to disclose most of the things that are not being disclosed so far. So regarding integration of the similar simultaneously ongoing processes, I think there were some consultation workshops being conducted, and I have been also attending one of the multi-stakeholder consultation workshop on the nexus between those simultaneously functioning processes. So the Ministry of Peace and Ethiopian Civil Society Organizations Council have been organizing this event, and some of their responsibilities, if I'm not mistaken, is already given to the Ministry of Peace to work on this and to come up with, its finding or option on how to integrate those processes together and, contribute to the meaningful result. So that's the information we had so far in this regard. So accountability on the politicians and the government, I think that's one of the questions that I would also ask if there is anyone who can respond to this question. So I will leave it for every one of us, including myself, to to explore more in this issue. And regarding the role of Eritrean government and Eritrean soldiers in the conflict, the scope of my research, and I'm sure I think Eden is also doesn't cover that area. So this is what we can respond for the questions raised so far. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll just pick from where she has left when it comes to accountability of our political leader. Considering the corruption level in Kenya and the political influence that we have had when it comes to transitional justice processes, it has made it a bit difficult or a challenge when it comes to accountability of transitional justice processes. And I will say, yes, there were concerns about political interference when it comes to the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission of Kenya, because we all know that the first chair of the commission had an interest in some of the atrocities that happened, and the community at one point or another, they mentioned that without the political will or the politicians driving the agenda of the TJRC, that is why until now we have not seen the implementation of the report. So there is need to also have a political will in driving the agenda of the TJRC for it to be implemented. We know very well that politicians can actually sabotage successful actions when their interest is affected. So it is actually a concern. And I think by working together in terms of the three arms of our government involving the judiciary, legislative and executive, and also not leaving out the international community and the civil society organization, through the advocacy and airing out some of these concerns, something can happen. We are still hopeful that we'll still, the TJRC report will see light of day. We are told it's in a shelf somewhere gathering dust. One day we will blow off the dust and see its implementation.
Thank you.
I think much has been said, and it's good that we are all talking about politicians not accountable or not. But we should also pose the question to ourselves. These are the people who we delegate our right to. They represent us. It's you and I in this room. I also presume that in the wherever county that you come from or the country that you come from, you also elect your leaders. That we are the one who delegate our right. So we should also screen and counter-check these people. And remember, some of them, in Kenya we have a body called ESSC, and who also do look at their integrity before you vie for this political seat. Truth of the matter is that these people have got some tinted images before even they rose to political hem. It's you and I who voted for these people. Let's not try to demonize them when they come to their power. It is through you and I who killed that particular son or Uskochi son or a reigning who voted for these people. That's also something that I have. And on TJRC, we also have a byproduct. I think a good office, which is NCIC, something like that. I don't know whether it's a discussion, it's a byproduct of that particular discussion. And where do we also, maybe what made us to think of TJRC is also a question that we come. Do you remember what happened in Kenya in those years? A very good report which was written, still collecting dust, people are saying. But you have also a National Cohesion and Integration Commission, which they are trying to also maybe mambo jumble and try to maybe bring these local communities or the Kenyan community, diverse communities together. So my question is, it all starts with you and I, and we also have a role to play. It's not like we always point. They say in the rule of thumb, when you point to one person, the others also point to you. Over.
Thank you. Before we do another round, maybe let me abuse my powers as the moderator, maybe to answer some of the questions. From my experience, so with regards to the question that was asked about recommendations for others who are involved in the process, trying to improve the process despite it being political, I want to just draw from the Kenyan experience a bit. I think what is different with the Ethiopian process, and might be a challenge, is that there are no facilitators or guarantors that are not necessarily Ethiopian of the process. When we went through the Kenyan process, I think one of the main advantages that we had is that when the Kenya government at the time accepted a mediation process that was led by other people that are non-Kenyans. And so when Kofi Annan came, mediated, he didn't leave. He remained. Even when the agenda was set, he remained in the country. And I think there were agreements around how he could have a team that could monitor the processes. So what happened with that, and I think, is that there was a bit of cohesion in terms of which process started. There was an agreement which one started and how they worked, and interlinked eventually. So when we had the Commission of Inquiry do its work, the bill was very specific on the timelines, and when the Commission of Inquiry finished, we were already in the process of negotiating a bill for setting up the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, and there were the other processes. Now, we had varied results from these mechanisms. The CPEB report eventually, I think because it infused elements of pushing the government to ensure that the recommendations were implemented. There was like the 60-day timeline that was put. If the government does nothing, this matter gets referred to the ICC. So something different happened from previous commission reports that we had, and the government eventually would be pushed to try and implement the recommendations. The TJRC, unfortunately, in the long process, I think what happened when the ICC process started, it now became very polarized in how the other processes were run. So one, we ended up with a commission with commissioners who are questionable for the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, which was the longer term of most of those processes. But there's one thing that we don't talk about sufficiently. The fact that even that TJRC had brought in commissioners that were non-Kenyan. So at the height of their issues within the commissioners at the top level, and the commission was almost collapsing, what held it together were those people who did not have vested interests because they were not Kenyan. And those international commissioners, I remember, they really kept it going, and eventually we ended up with a report. If it had just been Kenyans as the commissioners, I doubt we'd have ended up with a report. We now have a report, I think, and the question around holding governments accountable. We were in a forum with a few people who are here the last 2 days, and one of the things that I was telling one of the commissioners who was actually within the Commission of Inquiry on the post-election violence was the goodwill they got from government then. If we were to repeat that process today, they wouldn't get it. Because why? Because the environment was conducive at the time. We later ended up with government of people who had been implicated in the post-election violence, and things have changed and the dynamics have changed. So in terms of Ethiopia, I think the issue is the environment might have been conducive in 2018, more conducive than it is now, to have some of these guarantees put in place. But I think the communities that are supporting these processes can actually come together and put together and maybe negotiate with the government to have a process that can monitor the implementation and assist in ensuring that the processes are actually interlinked, instead of having all these different processes. And so perhaps that's one of the suggestions. And then the second thing that I think could be done is what Eden and Yabsra have done. Keep highlighting where the gaps are, and eventually a few steps might be made where corrections are made along the process. And for Kenya, with regards to the accountability, I know Rosa said, yeah, we keep the fire burning. I've seen victim groups have continued to push, and especially on the reparations part of the TJRC report implementation. And sometimes the government of the day buckles a bit and allows a conversation around what could be done. So in terms of implementing aspects of the TJRC report that might not be as controversial as others. So for instance, there's a time the Attorney General agreed to actually initiate a process for setting up a reparations policy within the government, drawn from the TJRC report. It hasn't gone far, but consistent push, petitions to Parliament. One day, we never know, we might have another conducive moment to actually push for the implementation. But even if it's in the shelf, we know what the contents are, and I think Kenyans, a cross-section of the Kenyan community have kept raising the need for implementation of that report. So let me open up now to a second round of questions. We'll take only 3. So we'll take 1, 2, and 3, and maybe 4. Then we close.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Susan Chege from Peace Actors Forum. I'm usually afraid to speak with the microphone because my voice is very loud. I want to give a comment, especially on the TJRC, the processes that we really engage in. One of the things that we keep on leaving out as peace actors is process of follow-up. Why some of these things end up not really taking place is that we don't have a clear process of follow-up. The second thing is that we disengage very, very fast. With the TJRC report, what did we do, especially when the former president offered an apology? There was a public apology that was offered on the atrocities that had occurred. We went silent. That was the spur of the moment for us to push on, to follow up and say, yes, he has said he's apologizing on behalf of the atrocities that happened. Then what do we put in place to actually engage in an amend process? Many of our processes end up in the shelves, mainly because we as actors, I'm calling everyone, we as actors, are sometimes lenient. We are sometimes going back to say, things are happening. Let's see how far they go. That is the challenge that we have. So even within the processes that we are having, the dialogue process that the Kenya had, how many voices were included? The voices of even the very local women are now read. If you go to Clinton Institute inside the mediators, you will hear the Kenyan women voices included in the Kofi Annan process. We might hear the voices, but where are they? Where are they in challenging the situation today? Why do we completely disengage when the process comes? I think we have to look at where the rain started beating us and why it continues to beat us that we are not able to come up with a proper policy. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's this. Okay. She had her hand
At the pocket.
Thank you. My name is Nana Marekia from the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. My question is on the consideration of political transitions, and if that's something that was looked at within the research. I ask because a lot of the time we find in the region, we have a political transition happens. It's the right moment, yes, for transitional justice processes, for institutional strengthening or rebuilding and so on. But there's this protracted period of peace processes where we are now talking about recommendations of that process maybe 20, 30 years later. In Liberia, we're still talking about implementation of the TRC recommendations 21 years after the TRC process. I mean, obviously the opportunity is not ripe. I mean, the moment is not ripe for implementation at that point. So was there consideration of the transition moment and how that influenced what kind of processes or mechanisms are considered? And also, was there a consideration of the limitations of some of the processes and mechanisms that we opt for? A TRC has limitations, so it can't do everything. It can't prosecute. It can't be involved, for instance, in retributive justice processes in a way that's meaningful. So I'm just wondering if there was consideration of some of those issues. Yeah. Thank you.
Not that much.
Not that much, but an acknowledgement.
Hello, my name is Olinda. I am an associate fellow at ILC. And my question was reconciling religion and peace when talking about rituals and reconciliation, and also how that could be used in traditional reconciliation, but also into justice. So how do you move forward after reconciliation, forgiveness, but then also going into justice and also into engaging with international community? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joseph from Wasanisana. My question is, let me start with the phrase, I'm having a tree in my garden and I'm realizing that it starts to bend. The best thing I can do to that tree is not cutting it down, but to strengthen the stem for it to stand upright. Today I'm asking, how are you involving the youths, rather the young people, in the places, because if you realize that is where a lot of energy is in the young people. So how are you using that energy, or rather how are you using them to maybe bring that change up? Because if you make good use of them, tomorrow you are going to have a good result. So how are you involving them in the process, actually? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we stop there. We can start with you again.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to start with the question on reconciling religion and peace, how we move forward after that and going to justice and international responsibilities. For me, I think I would go back to the African Union Transitional Justice Policy, in a way that how do we see reconciliation, how do we see justice? Within the traditional justice mechanisms, when we talk about forgiveness, when we talk about reconciliation, we're not saying there's no element of accountability. There is indeed accountability within those traditional mechanisms. When we talk about reconciliation as well, is people are acknowledging what they have done. By the virtue of you acknowledging what you have done, you're taking accountability for the mistakes and trying to own up to how you're going to fix that. So when we look, this is like traditional justice mechanisms are usually connected to restorative justice, but also within that, restorative justice, there's element of accountability. I think we usually don't think about those because when we think about reconciliation, we're just thinking about conversations and then just moving forward. So within that, also acknowledging and also being able to tell people, yes, I was wrong for this, is part of justice. Justice does not necessarily mean being behind bars, in my take. It's the element is beyond that. Asking political forgiveness is also accountability, and asking communities to come together and do those rituals is also part of that accountability, I would say. In terms of maybe the political transition, the limitation in this mechanisms definitely were considered in my paper. For instance, traditional justice mechanisms, initially they were designed to entertain local cases. They were never designed to cross boundary and entertain national issues. So one of the questions is also, are they able to be part of a national level processes when the issues are very much elite based? The questions are about national issues, about historical figures, about monuments. It's sometimes it might be beyond their capacity to undertake, those questions, because resolving conflict within intra-community issues and inter-community issues is very much different. So the recommendation would be they should be capacitated in a way to be able to take on that burden, because it's a heavy burden to carry when they were not designed to carry that burden. So this kind of also take us back to gachacha, when there's a need, in times, because we do TJ in times of need. We don't do TJ on a day-to-day regular basis, right? It's not a regular justice processes. So when the need be, how do we capacitate them? How do we bring them on board? So one of the recommendations that I mentioned earlier is for them to be able to be recognized at the level, for them to be capacitated and be recognized to work vis-a-vis the formal justice mechanisms. So I would say capacitating them and enabling them to be part of those national processes would be key.
Okay. Do you have any question you want to answer?
I want to talk to the youth, stick to the youth question. Maybe I think something is similar to that.
Okay.
I want to say something on the final questions raised by my brother. So let me rephrase it a bit, like how can we meaningfully engage youths in such kind of processes? Because most of the time we see them like numerically represented. We have this amount of young people or young men or women in these processes, but we are not seeing their real concern are represented at the decision-making level. So in our country case, specifically to the past, the ongoing processes, they are represented especially at the consultation level. But when we see the, for example, the members of the working group as well as the commissioners, the representation, the meaningful representation of users are not properly addressed in that process. So we mostly see them users on the implementation stage, not instead of the preparation or just understanding the context from the initial process. In order to address this issue, I think what we should do is, users, like when we talk about them, we usually tend to understand as if they have similar demand or similar need, but based on the factors that can affect the user's need and demand, their requests might be different. The need for a use from rural community and urban community might be different. Physically disabled young person and the other way around, their need might be different. So from the very beginning, we have to differentiate those factors and understand the need of young people from different sections or from different strata. So in that stage, when we have been talking about inclusivity earlier, so once we understand their context, their demand, their need, our preparation to engage them in the implementation, the preparatory stage, implementation, and the monitoring and evaluation stage would help us to meaningfully bring them on board and make the the necessary outcome at the end of the day. Otherwise, if they are not meaningfully engaged today, there will be someone tomorrow which is out of the young age group, so they will be the one who's going to make challenges or aggravate even conflict specific to our context. So understanding their need across different groups and also bringing them on board, starting from the planning and to implementation and monitoring, evaluation, sustainability components is very crucial. So far, we have been engaged, like as a young woman in our country case, we have been engaged in the consultation process, which is in the middle of the process. We don't know about the next stage on the implementation, but that's the key question that we have to also address. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Okay, thank you again. So looking at some of the questions, I think when I refer to Nana's question in terms of considering transitional justice during political season, I will say, and I mentioned, transitional justice is still something very new. It's a young baby when it comes to addressing injustices in the country. So I think there's still room for research to inform the right time for implementation of transitional justice, because as Susan Owiro has mentioned, we seem to be missing the phases, the opportunities on when we think that transitional justice can really be implemented and thrive really well. So I think this is another opportunity for research to just see on what is the right time for implementation of transitional justice in the different countries and post-conflict societies. And I'm already giving it as a sign for Aaron for the next season of research to come. And when we talk about religion and justice and peace, for Africa, I would say we are a very religious community, and most probably 8 out of every 10 people believe in a supreme being. And religion has played a great role when it comes to addressing injustices within our communities and even fostering forgiveness, because most of the time people will say, God had a purpose for this, God is doing something on it. So religion, when it comes to addressing people in a religious basis, it informs people in a way that they connect with it personally. It is not just any other discussion on peace or justice, but when you talk about religion, there is that connection that Africa community have with religion, and even with the teachings and some of the traditional Africa practices that we have. If something is considered a taboo or a norm, it probably will not be done because of the kind of curses that people believe when it comes to this religion belief. So religion has a great a role to play when it comes to justice and peace building. And when I talk about the involvement of youth, I will use the case of Kenya. I mentioned we are roughly around 75% of the total population, and this one is increasing. Considering the mortality rate that we are currently having in the country, the youth numbers are increasing, and the challenge is that it is increasing with more challenges. The youth are experiencing lack of unemployment. Within the local level, there is no employment for youth. There is no inclusion of youth in political processes. There is very limited opportunities for youth to engage. And this actually can be a red flag or a sign that there is need to engage youth when it comes not only in transitional justice. As my colleague has mentioned, youth are affected when it comes to human rights violation, especially when it comes to extrajudicial killing and forced disappearance. And what is it that we are doing in terms of creating awareness among the youths or empowering youth with skills that can help them in terms of addressing some of these issues? There are approaches that can be used when it comes to engaging youth. There is the peer-to-peer learning that actually fosters a lot of influence in terms of youth engagement in engaging in change. And also, when we're talking about transitional justice, we know that a number of youths in informal settlements are engaging in crime or are manipulated by politicians to also engage in violence. This safe space for hearing and testimony sharing are opportunities for youth to learn from other survivors who have been in such cases, and also use that learning to change and shape their life, because we've had youth who are in crime mentioning that they were able to change because they saw what happened to their friend, because their friend informed them that one or two things that happened were not good. So this kind of peer-to-peer learning and testimonies are key in terms of influencing the status of youths in the community, and also in terms of providing opportunities for youth in employment, skill training, by just creating linkages and access to opportunity.
Thank you. Maybe just to add a few snippets on the question around whether the articles considered the place of political transitions. For the Ethiopia, the articles that have been done by Eden and Yabsra, there's an acknowledgement that 2018, when the new government took over, provided that moment for a conversation about historical injustices, and that's when the conversation started. But that conversation has also just evolved differently based on the developments in the country after that, the conflict in northern Tigray, and these other conflicts. And so the articles delve into what considerations, and I think Yapsra spoke about how certain regions have actually been left out in the consultations because they are inaccessible for some of the commissioners in the national dialogue. So there's a consideration of that. But I think a conversation that we need to have longer term, not now, is also how short those moments sometimes are, in terms of that when the stars align, they are not aligned for too long. And when there are all these other new developments, then you have to go back to the drawing board, because then the government of the day then also becomes a hindrance towards achieving the successes that they set out for transitional justice. We've come to the end of this conversation. I'm really hoping that the discussion we've had has provided insights into what you will find when you delve into reading the bulletin. And I'm thankful to Life and Peace and the ALC for organizing this forum and for inviting me to moderate the forum. So I will now hand over and invite Aaron to take over the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name's Aaron Stanley, and I'm a Senior Global Policy Advisor at the Life and Peace Institute. And my role in this was I had the opportunity to edit this edition of the Horn of Africa Bulletin. And I just want to say what a fantastic panel, and what great questions, really thought-provoking questions from everybody who's been here. We're so excited to have been able to support these 5 research projects and their publication. And it's, I want to thank Swedish CETA for all their support in being able to do these original research projects and the continuous publication of the Horn of Africa Bulletin. I had the pleasure to work with all 4 of you, as well as Hassan, who's not here with us today. I think it would have been really interesting to hear Hassan's as well. I hope you will get the opportunity to read his article and look at some of these questions around accountability and justice structures and the differences between how things are changing in Somalia around cultural perceptions of individual accountability and restorative justice practices. And so I encourage you, please, he hasn't been here to be able to share his thoughts as well. Please do go through those articles as well as everyone else's. One of the most rewarding things about this process has been able to see these projects grow and evolve. It's pretty incredibly rewarding to see the polished products today and how far each of the researchers have come, from starting with working out a research question to implementing their own original research, and then going through the process of kind of identifying and then the data analysis. And then this project is part of a larger effort at the Life and Peace Institute to support participatory and locally focused research. The Life and Peace Institute, we have a long history of connecting rigorous research with focused, practical programming and policy engagement. And the Horn of Africa Bulletin is just one of a few platforms that's consistently dedicated to elevating voices from the region on critical policy topics about the region. In addition to the Horn of Africa Bulletin, we're also increasingly excited to be partnering with the African Leadership Center to advance this study and practice of topics such as peace building, governance, justice, human rights, and social cohesion, among other topics. And that partnership has really grown, and we're excited to have been exchanging fellows, working on research, sharing events like this, as well as looking into other opportunities to conduct original research. So I want to thank African Leadership Center for their support for this forum and for creating spaces for these important conversations. Additionally, I want to thank Stella, our moderator, who's come in and done fantastically contributed to leading this discussion. And I want to thank all of you for your deep engagement, and again, for the thought-provoking questions that you've asked today. I also want to thank all of those who have been working on the publication and who are working on the event behind the scenes. There's a lot that goes into this, both the event as well as the publication itself. There are a lot of people who have offered their time and their skills both in editing, reviewing, design, and they don't necessarily get kind of be on the panel, but I know that they've all contributed to the development of these articles. And finally, I want to thank the authors. This has been a long process. It's taken a lot of effort. You guys all have day jobs and other things that you're doing, family commitments, and so on. And you've brought a lot of patience and a lot of care to this work. And I think the findings and your final products really show that. So with that, thank you very much from myself and on behalf of the Life and Peace Institute.
Thanks, Aaron. I think it's already afternoon at this point, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Halima Ahmed. I'm a research associate and coordinator here at the ALC. Wrapping it up for everyone, and just to say thanks all around. So a heartfelt thank you to the Life and Peace Institute for essentially just orchestrating and driving this crucial conversation on transitional justice and reconciliation in the Horn of Africa. I think it's safe to say that your dedication to fostering dialogue and collaboration is truly commendable. And it's provided us, I guess, with a platform to engage deeply on the issues around transitional justice and reconciliation in the Horn of Africa. And they are vital issues. They are meant to be discussed. They are meant to be talked about. We're also grateful all around to the African Leadership Center for co-hosting this dialogue and for generously opening its doors to the conversation. To all our distinguished speakers, contributors, and participants all around, your insights and perspectives have enriched our understanding and inspired us to redouble our efforts towards peace and reconciliation. So to wrap it up and to let you guys go, thank you for all your unwavering dedication, invaluable contribution, and may our collective endeavors lead us to a future defined by enduring harmony and prosperity for all. Thank you. So I guess in the meantime, we can mingle, we can have tete-a-tetes with one another, network, and I'm pretty sure we have refreshments somewhere around. So yeah, feel free to interact with one another. Thank you.
I'm done with the drama.
Ngozi yako ina glow. Nilijipaka mafuta leo asubuhi nikikam, lakini